The forest was dark and silent. The night air was heavy and the wind moved slowly through the trees. Above the forest sky, something strange appeared. A ball of fire cut across the black night. It was not a star, and it was not a plane. It moved too fast, glowing red and orange, with sparks falling behind it. Then came the sound, a loud roar like thunder shaking the ground. The fireball crashed deep inside the forest, lighting up the trees with a burning glow. A man named Daniel stood far away on a rocky hill. He was not a soldier now, but once he had been. Now he lived alone in the wilderness, away from the noise of cities. When he saw the fire streak across the sky, his heart jumped. It was no ordinary crash. Something inside told him he must go. He grabbed his old lantern, took his backpack, and hurried down the hill. The closer he came to the crash site, the stronger the smell of smoke grew. The air was filled with strange sparks, almost electric. The trees were broken, leaves burning slowly. And there in the middle of the fallen branches was a half-burned ship. Not a human ship. Not something Daniel had ever seen before. It was shaped like a long silver seed, but cracked open in the middle. Parts of it glowed. With blue light, parts of it hissed like boiling water. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. This was not from Earth. This was something alien. He stepped closer, his boots crunching the ash. The ground was warm, almost too hot. Pieces of the ship scattered around him, sharp and glowing. Daniel touched none of them. Instead, he listened, and then he heard it. A soft sound, a whimper, almost like a child crying. He froze. The sound came again, louder, desperate. His heart pounded. He followed the sound and moved to the broken opening of the ship. Inside, smoke drifted and the air was heavy. The walls of the ship were strange, covered with markings he could not read. And there, in the shadows, he saw them. A figure was lying on the floor, weak, breathing heavily. Beside the figure was a smaller shape, curled up, crying softly. Daniel stepped closer, his lantern shaking in his hand. He saw her face, and his breath stopped. It was a woman, but not human. Her skin was pale with a soft glow, her eyes large and silver like the moon. Her hair was thin, shining with blue strands. She was holding the smaller one close. A baby. The baby's skin glimmered faintly, its tiny hands clutching at the air. The woman's eyes looked at Daniel. Wide with fear, she whispered something in a language he did not know. Her voice was weak, broken. But Daniel understood the meaning in her eyes. She was asking for help. Daniel stood still, his mind racing. This was impossible. Unreal. An alien woman, a mother, and her child. What should he do? If the world found out, they would take her, study her, lock her away. If the soldiers came, they would not see a mother and baby. They would see only enemies, only danger. The woman coughed, holding her baby tighter. Daniel felt his chest tighten. He had once held his own baby, years ago before his wife passed. The memory struck him like lightning. Now, before him, another mother was begging silently. Smoke grew thicker. Flames spread across the wreck. If he stayed here too long, the ship would explode. He had no time. Daniel dropped his lantern, hurried forward, and knelt beside her. He spoke softly, slowly. "It's okay. I will help you." Of course, she did not understand his words, but she seemed to feel the calm in his voice. She looked at her baby, then at him, then back at her baby. Her trembling hand reached toward him. It was not trust, not yet. It was desperation. But Daniel took it as a sign. He picked up the small, glowing child carefully. The baby cried once, then went quiet in his arms. The woman tried to rise, but she was too weak. Daniel slipped his arm under her and lifted her slowly. She was light, lighter than a human, but her body shook with pain. The fire inside the ship was growing. The sound of metal cracking filled the air. Daniel staggered out of the ship, carrying both mother and child. Behind him, the silver seed groaned, then burst into flames. Pieces of glowing metal shot into the air. The forest lit, upright as day. Daniel stumbled into the trees, breathing hard. He kept walking until the fire behind was only a glow through the leaves. He set the woman gently against a tree, the baby still in his arms. She looked at him, her silver eyes filled with fear and confusion, but also something else and a small spark of hope. Daniel looked back at the burning wreck. He knew the sound of the crash would draw others, the military, the scientists, maybe worse. They would come here soon. He looked down at the woman and her baby. They had no one else, nowhere to go, and he knew at that moment his life had changed. He could walk away, or he could save them. He looked once more at the child in his arms, and then he made his choice. Daniel whispered to himself, his voice firm, "You are safe now. I will protect you." The forest around him was silent again, but inside he knew the real storm was only beginning. The forest did not sleep that night. After the crash, the animals had fled. The birds had gone silent, and the trees still glowed, faintly from the burning wreck. But deeper inside the forest, Daniel was moving quickly, carrying the baby in his arms and guiding the weak alien woman with his other hand. Her steps were unsteady, her breath shallow, but her eyes refused to. Close, she was fighting to stay awake, fighting to stay near her child. Daniel knew the soldiers would come soon. He had once been one of them. He knew how they worked, how fast they moved when something strange appeared. A crash like this, glowing fire from the sky, would call not only the army but also men in dark coats, men who cared only about secrets. If they found the woman and her baby, they would not see a mother and child. They would see property, a chance for experiments, a weapon. Daniel's jaw tightened as he led them through the forest. He remembered an old cabin deep in the woods, hidden between cliffs and tall pines. It had once belonged to his grandfather, a hunter who never liked visitors. Few people even knew it existed. That was where he would take them. Step by step, he pushed forward, until finally the small wooden house appeared in the moonlight, quiet and forgotten. The door creaked as he opened it, the smell of dust and old wood filling the air. Inside there was little: a broken table, a stove, a bed made of straw and cloth. But it was shelter, and for now, shelter was enough. Daniel set the woman down on the bed carefully. The baby was still in his arms, quiet now, staring at him. With wide, glowing eyes, for a moment Daniel felt a strange warmth in his chest. The child's gaze reminded him of nights long ago, when he had held his own baby girl. That memory burned, but it also gave him strength. The woman reached weakly for her baby, and Daniel placed the child in her arms. Her silver eyes softened, and for the first time since he found her, she seemed calm. He lit a fire in the old stove, using wood from the pile outside. The light pushed back the shadows. The woman flinched at the flames, but Daniel spoke softly, his voice calm. "It's safe. Fire will not hurt you here." She could not understand his words, but his tone seemed to reach her. The baby made a small sound, and the woman smiled faintly, her thin blue hair glowing in the firelight. Daniel sat down on the floor across from them, thinking, planning. He had brought strangers into his life, strangers from the stars, and now the whole world might come looking for them. Hours passed. Outside, the night was restless. At one point, Daniel heard the faint hum of helicopters in the distance. He froze, listening. The sound grew louder, then faded away, moving toward the crash site. He let out a slow breath, but he knew it was only the beginning. Soon men would sweep the area, searching, hunting. He had to keep them hidden no matter what. The woman tried to speak again, her words soft and broken. She touched her chest, then touched the baby, then pointed. At him, Daniel frowned. Trying to understand, he touched his own chest. "Daniel," he said slowly. She blinked, then whispered something like, "Nail." It was not exact, but close. She pointed again at herself, whispering a word too soft for him to catch. Then she touched the baby's head and spoke another word, a name. Daniel repeated both names quietly, though he was not sure if he said them right. The woman gave the faintest smile. and for the first time, trust flickered between them. Suddenly, a sound outside. The crunch of boots on dry leaves. Daniel's body went stiff. He moved quickly, putting a finger to his lips, signaling silence. The woman clutched her baby close, her silver eyes wide. Daniel grabbed his old rifle from the wall, the same one he had used for hunting. He crept to the window, his heart beating fast. Two shadows moved near the trees, flashlights cutting through. The darkness, voices carried in the night, sharp and strict. Soldiers. They were searching already, faster than he had hoped. The light came close to the cabin wall. Daniel's grip on the rifle tightened. He thought of firing, thought of running, but both would end in death. Instead, he stepped outside quietly, leaving the door closed behind him. "Who goes there?" One soldier called out, his voice harsh. Daniel forced a calm smile. "Just a hunter," he said. "Been living here for years." The soldier shone the light on him, eyes narrow. "Did you see anything fall from the sky tonight?" Daniel shook his head slowly. "Only fire in the distance, scared the animals, nothing else." The soldier stared at him for a long moment, then turned away. "Keep to your woods, old man," he muttered before moving on. The voices faded. The lights vanished. Daniel stood still, waiting until the silence returned. When he stepped back inside, the woman's eyes were on him. She had not understood the words, but she understood the danger. She looked at him differently now, no longer only with fear. There was gratitude and a small spark of trust. Daniel put the rifle back and sat down. The baby laughed softly, reaching for his finger, and in that small cabin, hidden from the world, a fragile new bond was being born. But Daniel knew this was only the beginning. The soldiers would not stop. The world would not stop if he chose this path. There was no turning back. And yet, as he looked at the mother and child, he knew he had already made his choice. Morning came slowly to the forest. The cabin walls glowed with thin lines of sunlight. Daniel sat on the floor, his back against the wall, his eyes heavy but alert. He had not slept, not after the soldiers passed so close. He listened to every sound, every branch moving in the wind. But inside the cabin, the world was different. The baby slept peacefully in the alien mother's arms, tiny chest rising and falling with soft breaths. The woman herself was weak, her skin pale, but her eyes stayed open, watching both her child and Daniel. When the baby woke, a new problem began. The child cried, not with human sounds, but with soft echoes that seemed to vibrate in the air. Daniel panicked at first, afraid the sound would carry too far. He rushed to the door, listening for soldiers, but the forest stayed calm, no voices, no boots on the ground. Still, the baby's cry was filled with hunger, and Daniel did not know how to feed it. He searched the cabin, found an old jug of water, and poured some into a cup. The woman tried to take it, her weak hands shaking. She sipped carefully, then touched the baby's lips with wet fingers. The baby quieted for a moment, then cried again, hungrier than before. Daniel frowned, thinking fast. He had goats once, years ago, but no animals now. Only the few supplies he kept, dry bread, beans, and milk powder from old rations. It was not much, but it was all he had. He heated water on the stove, mixed the powder, and tried to cool it. The woman watched him, her silver eyes cautious. Daniel held the cup near the baby, unsure if it would work. The child made a soft sound, sniffed, then sipped clumsily. Daniel's shoulders dropped with relief as the baby began to drink. The woman looked at him then, her face softening for the first time. It was not trust yet, but it was not fear either. It was something between, fragile but real. Over the next days, life inside the cabin changed. The woman grew stronger slowly, though her body was still weak. Daniel found herbs in the forest, boiled them in water, and gave them to her. She drank, coughing but refusing to stop. The baby laughed sometimes, small bright sounds that filled the quiet room. Daniel felt something inside him shift. He had lived alone for so long, and now this strange family had entered his life. He could not push them away, even if the danger grew. The woman began to try speaking. Her words were broken, sharp, but Daniel listened carefully. She touched her chest and said her name again. Slower this time. He repeated it, clumsy but closer. She nodded faintly, then touched the baby and spoke the child's name. Daniel whispered it back, smiling softly. Then he touched his own chest. Daniel, he said. The woman repeated it, her voice almost clear. Something passed between them, the first bridge of language. At night, Daniel worked to keep the fire small so no smoke would show. But he also returned to the crash site. When he dared, moving through shadows, the burned ship was still guarded by soldiers, their light sweeping across the wreck. He stayed hidden, but one night he found something half buried under leaves, a small black device glowing faintly. It hummed when he touched it. Daniel carried it back to the cabin, setting it on the table. The woman's face turned pale when she saw it. She whispered fast in her tongue, pointing at the device with shaking hands. Daniel did not understand the words, but he understood her fear. It was a tracker. Someone else was looking for them. The next morning, Daniel took the device deep into the woods. He smashed it against a rock, again and again until the glow went dark. But he knew it was not enough. If one tracker existed, there could be more. If the soldiers were not the only hunters, danger was closer than ever. Back in the cabin, the woman tried to thank him, though. Her words were rough. She touched her chest, then his, then placed her hand over her child. Her eyes shone with something more than gratitude. It was a promise, a silent bond forming in the firelight. That night, Daniel could not sleep. He watched the baby resting against the mother. He thought about his past, about the daughter he had, lost about the empty years since. And now here they were, strangers from another world, and yet he felt less alone than he had in years. But with that feeling came fear. Because bonds made you weak, bonds made you fight harder, and he knew soon someone would come to tear them apart. Outside the forest was still, but Daniel's heart was not. He stood at the window, rifle in hand. The fire inside the stove burned low. The woman and child safe for now. But he knew safety would not last. And as he whispered their names under his breath, he also whispered a vow. They are my family now, and I will not lose them. The forest was quiet when the danger came. It began with a strange hum in the sky, low and steady. Daniel lifted his head at once, his ears sharp. He knew that sound did not belong to helicopters or planes. It was something else, something heavier, something colder. He stepped outside the cabin, rifle in hand, eyes searching the night, and then he saw them. Dark shapes slid through the clouds, glowing with pale red lights. They were not human machines, they were alien craft. Daniel's chest tightened. The widow inside the cabin must have felt it too. She rushed to the door, holding her baby tight, her silver eyes wide with terror. She whispered words Daniel could not understand. But fear has no language. He saw it written across her face. She knew who they were. She knew what they wanted. The ships landed near the burned wreck, far enough but close enough to reach. Figures stepped out, tall and armored, moving like hunters in the dark. Their armor glowed faintly, their helmets smooth, their weapons sharp and long. They carried themselves like soldiers, but not like Daniel's kind. They moved like predators, silent and sure. The widow pressed her back against the wall, whispering to her child. Daniel's jaw clenched. Whoever these hunters were, they were not here to save her. They were here to finish what had begun. He pulled the lantern low and whispered, "We have to leave." She did not know the words, but she understood the urgency in his voice. Daniel grabbed his pack, stuffed food, water, and blankets inside. The baby cried softly, and the widow covered the sound with her trembling hand. Daniel opened the door carefully, scanning the trees. No soldiers yet, no footsteps near, but the glow of alien lights painted the sky. He motioned for her to follow, and together they slipped into the forest. The night was cruel. Every branch snapping underfoot sounded like thunder. Daniel's heart pounded. The widow clung to the baby, holding him close to her chest. Behind them, the hunters spread out, scanning with strange beams of red light. The beams swept across the trees, burning the leaves where they touched. Daniel pushed them deeper away from the cabin, toward the cliffs. He knew a cave nearby, hidden by thick roots and fallen stones. It might be their only chance. As they moved, the widow stumbled, her weak body trembling. Daniel caught her before she fell. She shook her head, whispering something desperate. She wanted him to leave her, to take the baby and run. But Daniel gripped her arm firmly, shaking his head. "No, we stay together," he said. She didn't know the words, but she saw the fire in his eyes. She nodded weakly and kept moving. The hunters were closer now, their voices sharp and metallic. Daniel crouched low, pulling the widow and child behind a fallen log. Two armored figures walked past, their weapons glowing. They moved with perfect discipline, scanning every shadow. Daniel held his breath, every muscle in his body tight. The baby whimpered once, a tiny sound. The widow pressed her hand gently over the child's mouth, rocking him softly. The hunters paused, turning their heads. Daniel raised his rifle slowly, ready to fire if they came closer. But after a moment, the hunters moved on. The danger passed, but not for long. When they reached the cave, Daniel pushed aside the branches and led them inside. It was cold and damp, but hidden. The widow collapsed against the wall, clutching her baby close. Daniel knelt beside her, whispering softly, "We are safe for now." But even as he said it, the words felt weak, because outside the hunters were still searching, and they would not stop until they found her. The woman's eyes met his, full of fear, but also of something else. She began to speak. Her voice, low and broken. She pointed at herself, then at the baby, then toward the sky. Her words were strange, but Daniel understood enough. Her people were gone, her husband killed, her child hunted. These armored figures were not strangers to her. They were enemies. They had destroyed her family, and now they wanted to finish the last of her bloodline. Daniel's hands curled into fists. He thought of the soldiers, of the scientists, of all the people who might come, but none of them were as dangerous as these hunters. They were not bound by human rules, not by laws. They wanted only one thing, her death, her child's death. Daniel looked at the widow and her baby, and in that moment, his decision hardened. He would fight. He would protect them, no matter what it cost. Outside, the forest glowed with red lights, beams cutting through the dark. The hunters moved in silence, closing in. Daniel checked his rifle, counting the bullets. It was not enough, not against them. But he had his mind, his training, and his will. And sometimes, that was more powerful than any weapon. The widow touched his hand gently, her silver eyes glimmering in the dim light. She whispered something soft, a word filled with hope and fear. Daniel did not know its meaning, but he felt it in his heart. It was trust. It was the bond growing stronger. The hunters were near, their footsteps echoing through the night. And deep inside the cave, Daniel whispered a promise. "They will not take you. They will not take him. Not while I still breathe." The cave was cold and damp, but for a short while it gave them safety. Daniel kept his rifle close, his back against the stone wall, eyes never leaving the mouth of the cave. The widow sat nearby, holding her child tightly, whispering soft words in her strange tongue. Her voice was like a song, weak but filled with love. The baby made small sounds. Pressing his glowing hands against her face, Daniel watched them, and something heavy stirred inside his chest. It was not pity, it was not duty, it was something deeper, something that made him feel alive after years of emptiness. But safety was an illusion. Outside, the hunters were still moving through the forest, their red beams cutting across the night. Daniel could hear the low hum of their machines, the crunch of their armored steps. He knew they would not stop, not until they found her, not until they destroyed what little remained of her family. He could not stay in the cave forever. The air was thin, food was running out, and every hour the danger grew. The widow must have felt it too. She looked at him with tired silver eyes, her body shaking with weakness. She touched her chest, then the baby, then pushed her hand gently toward him. Daniel understood. She wanted him to take the baby, to run, to leave her behind. It broke something inside him. He shook his head firmly, whispering back, "No, never." She did not know the words, but she saw the fire in his eyes. She knew he would not abandon her. Still she tried again, pointing at her wounds, pressing her hand over her heart, as if to say, "I am already dying." But Daniel's hand covered hers, his voice low and steady. "You are not alone now. We stay together." That night the hunters drew closer. Daniel slipped out of the cave, moving through the trees like a shadow. He found their camp near the wreck, glowing with strange red lights guarded by 4 armored figures. They had set a trap, laying out strange devices across the ground, humming softly. Daniel watched from the shadows, his teeth clenched. If he returned the same way tomorrow, he would walk right into it. They were not only searching, they were waiting. Waiting for him, for her, for the child. When he returned to the cave, the widow's eyes searched his face. He shook his head, speaking softly. "They are close, too close." She did not understand his words, but she saw the weight in his expression. She lowered her gaze, whispering softly to her baby, rocking him to sleep. The next day, Daniel made a choice. He could not wait for them to find the cave. He had to lead them away. He packed what little food he had left, slung his rifle across his shoulder. He knelt beside the widow, placing his hand over hers. "You must trust me," he whispered. She stared at him for a long time, then nodded slowly. For the first time, there was no fear in her eyes, only faith. Daniel led them out of the cave, moving through the forest as quietly as possible. Every step was heavy with risk. The hunters were near, their voices sharp, their lights sweeping across the trees. At one point, a beam passed so close Daniel could feel the heat against his skin. He pressed the widow and child down into the dirt, covering them with his own body. The light swept away. The hunters passed, unaware. When it was safe, the widow touched his face gently, her eyes filled with something unspoken. It was gratitude, but it was more than that. It was trust. By nightfall, they reached the old bunker. It was buried under stone and roots built long ago during the war. Daniel forced open the rusty door and led them inside. The air was stale, the walls cold, but it was hidden, and that was what mattered. He laid out blankets for the widow, gave water to the baby, and checked his rifle again. The widow rested against the wall, her breathing slow. Daniel knew she was still wounded, still weak, but she refused to let go of her child. Later, as the baby slept, the widow spoke softly, her words broken but clearer than before. She pointed at the child and whispered his name. Then she touched Daniel's chest and whispered again. It was not his name this time. It was a word he had never heard. He did not know its meaning, but the way she said it made his chest tighten. It sounded like protector. He whispered it back, clumsy and rough. She smiled faintly, her eyes shining in the dim light. That night the hunters came. The ground shook with their steps, their red lights piercing the trees. Daniel held his rifle tight, standing near the door of the bunker. The widow held her baby close, whispering softly to calm him. The hunters stopped just outside, their voices harsh, their weapons humming. Daniel's heart thundered. He knew what he had to do. He looked at the widow, then at the child, then back at the door. His decision was already made. He stepped outside, rifle raised, his voice low but steady. "Come for me, not for them," he whispered, though they could not understand. The hunters turned. Red lights flashing, weapons ready. Daniel fired the first shot, the crack of the rifle shattering the night. The battle had begun, and inside the bunker, the widow held her baby tight, tears in her silver eyes. She knew what Daniel was doing. He was sacrificing himself to protect them. He was giving his life for trust, for family, for them. The night tore open with the sound of gunfire. Daniel's rifle cracked again and again, echoing through the trees. The armored hunters turned toward him, their red lights flaring in the darkness. Bolts of searing energy shot from their weapons, burning holes in the ground. Daniel dove behind a tree, the bark exploding where the blast struck. He gritted his teeth, reloaded, and fired back. One hunter staggered, armor sparking, but the others pressed forward without fear. They were not men, they were predators, and Daniel knew they would not stop. Inside the bunker, the widow held her child close. She could hear the battle outside, every shot, every roar of alien weapons. Her silver eyes filled with tears, her body trembling. But she did not scream. She did not cry out. She pressed her hand against the cold wall, whispering words in her language. It was a prayer, or maybe a promise. She wanted to help, but her body was weak, her wounds deep. Still, her spirit burned. Outside, Daniel ran from tree to tree, his breathing ragged. He was one man against many, but he fought with the fury of a father. He had nothing left to lose except them, the widow and her baby, his new family. That gave him strength he had thought long gone. He fired again, his bullet striking the visor of a hunter's helmet. The figure fell with a heavy crash, metal clattering on stone. But 3 more moved in from the side, their weapons glowing brighter. Daniel's leg burned as a beam grazed him. He stumbled, pain flashing through him, but he forced himself forward. He grabbed a fallen branch, lit it in the flames of a burning tree, and hurled it at them. The fire caught on one of the hunters, the glow of their armor flickering. Daniel used the distraction to roll behind a rock and reload. Sweat ran down his face. His heart pounded like a drum. He knew he could not hold them forever. He needed something more. Inside the bunker, the widow rose slowly, her body shaking. She placed her baby gently in the corner, wrapped in blankets. The child whimpered, reaching for her, but she whispered soft words. Then she turned her eyes toward the door, silver light burning inside them. She stepped out into the night, her thin frame glowing faintly in the dark. Daniel saw her and shouted, "No, stay back." But she lifted her hands, and suddenly the air shook. A wave of energy burst from her palms, pushing the hunters backward. The ground cracked, trees bent, and the night lit up with silver light. The hunters staggered, their weapons sparking. Daniel stared in shock. He had known she was different, but he had not known the strength she carried. Her voice rang out in her alien tongue, sharp and powerful. It was not just words, it was a command. The hunters hesitated, as if her voice struck something deeper inside them. But the effort broke her. She fell to her knees, coughing, her body trembling. Daniel rushed to her side, pulling her behind cover. "You'll kill yourself," he whispered. She shook her head weakly, pointing at the baby inside the bunker. Her meaning was clear. She would give everything to protect him. Daniel's chest ached, but there was no time for grief. The hunters were recovering, their red lights burning hotter. They roared in anger, moving toward them again. Daniel rose, rifle in hand, standing between the widow and the hunters. His body shook with exhaustion, his leg bleeding, but he refused to step back. He fired again, the bullet striking armor, sparks flying. The hunters closed in, their weapons raised, and then something unexpected happened. The baby cried out, but not like before. It was a cry that echoed through the trees, vibrating in the air. The hunters froze, their heads snapping toward the sound. Silver light spilled from the bunker door, glowing brighter and brighter. Daniel turned in shock. The baby was glowing. His tiny hands stretched toward the night, silver waves pulsing from his body. The hunters staggered, their armor trembling under the strange energy. One by one they fell to their knees, unable to move. The widow gasped, her eyes wide. She whispered, her child's name like it was both a prayer and a warning. Daniel stared, unable to believe what he was seeing. The baby's glow grew brighter, filling the forest with silver fire. The hunters roared in pain, their armor cracking, their weapons breaking. Finally, with a flash of light, the energy burst outward. The hunters were hurled back into the trees, their bodies crashing hard into the earth. Silence followed, broken only by the sound of the baby's soft cry. Daniel rushed into the bunker, scooping the child into his arms. The glow faded slowly, the baby's tiny body trembling from the effort. He was still alive, but weak, his breath shallow. Daniel held him close, whispering softly, "You're safe, little one. You're safe." The widow stumbled inside, her face pale, her body shaking. She reached out, touching her baby's face with trembling fingers. Then she looked at Daniel, her silver eyes filled with both sorrow and pride. The hunters were gone for now. But Daniel knew this was not the end. If they had found her once, they would find her again. And now, after seeing the power of the child, they would not stop. Daniel's body ached, his wounds burned, but his resolve only grew stronger. He looked at the widow, at the child, and he whispered a vow. No matter what comes, I will fight for you, both of you. The forest outside was silent once more, but Daniel knew the silence was only temporary, because now the hunters had seen the truth, and the truth was dangerous. The child was more than just a survivor. He was something greater, something powerful, and that power would draw enemies from every shadow. But Daniel did not care. To him, the child was not a weapon, not a prize. He was family. The forest was quiet again, but it was not peace. The hunters lay scattered in the shadows, their armor cracked, their lights gone dark. Smoke rose from the trees, and the air smelled of burnt metal and ash. Daniel stood at the door of the bunker, his rifle still in his hands, his body trembling with exhaustion. His leg bled, his arms shook, but his eyes stayed sharp. He waited for another attack, another sound, another glow in the sky. But for now, only silence answered. Inside, the widow cradled her child, her silver eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. The baby was weak, his tiny breaths shallow, his glow fading. She whispered to him softly, rocking him gently, singing in her alien tongue. Daniel stepped closer, his heart heavy. He had seen the power inside the child, power so great it had destroyed the hunters, but he also saw the cost. The child was fragile, small, too young to carry such a burden. Daniel knelt beside them, pressing a hand to the widow's shoulder. Her eyes lifted to his, full of sorrow, but also of something stronger, hope. For hours they stayed in the bunker waiting. Daniel kept watch at the door, his rifle ready. Every sound in the forest made him tense. Every flicker of light made him grip the weapon tighter. But no one came. The hunters were gone, at least for now. At dawn, the first light of morning crept into the bunker. Daniel stepped outside, the cool air brushing his face. The world looked different in the soft light, broken but alive. The wreck of the alien ship still smoldered far in the distance, a scar. On the earth, birds slowly returned to the trees, their songs soft but real. It felt like the world itself was healing. He walked back inside, where the widow sat holding her baby. She looked at him with tired eyes, but this time they carried no fear. Instead, there was trust, real trust, the kind that cannot be broken. She reached out, her hand brushing his. Daniel froze, then slowly wrapped his fingers around hers. It was not just a gesture of thanks, it was a bond, an unspoken promise. She whispered something in her language, pointing at the child, then at him, then at herself. Daniel did not understand the words, but he felt the meaning. They were not strangers anymore, not separate, they were family. The day passed quietly, but Daniel knew the danger was not gone. The hunters had failed, but others would come. The soldiers, the scientists, the enemies. From the stars, the baby's power would draw them all. But Daniel no longer thought of running. He thought of building, protecting, surviving. He thought of raising the child not as a weapon, but as a son. He thought of giving the widow more than safety, giving her a home. That night, as the stars filled the sky, Daniel sat outside the bunker. The widow joined him, her child asleep in her arms. For a long time they said nothing, only listened to the wind in the trees. Finally, Daniel spoke, his voice low. I don't know what will come, but I will fight for you. Both of you. The widow did not understand the words, but she saw his face, heard his tone, and she nodded slowly. Her eyes shimmered like silver moons, filled with gratitude and something more, something that needed no translation. The child stirred in her arms, letting out a soft sound. Daniel leaned closer, smiling faintly. The baby reached out, tiny glowing fingers curling around Daniel's hand. In that moment, something inside him healed. The emptiness he had carried for years, the loneliness, the grief of losing his own family. It did not vanish, but it no longer ruled him. This child was not his by blood, but by choice. And sometimes, choice was stronger than blood. As the firelight flickered, Daniel whispered to himself, "They are mine now, my family." The words felt strange but true. The widow heard his voice and tilted her head. She repeated one of her words, slow and careful. Daniel did not know what it meant, but it felt like a name, a bond, a vow. He whispered it back, his voice steady. She smiled, her eyes soft, her hand brushing his. But even in this quiet moment, Daniel knew the story was not over. Somewhere beyond the sky, others would hear of the hunter's failure. Others would learn of the child's power, and they would come. The future was uncertain, filled with battles he could not yet see. But Daniel did not feel fear. He felt ready, because he was no longer alone. He had a purpose, a family, a reason to stand and fight. The dawn came again, brighter this time, painting the forest in gold. Daniel stood at the edge of the trees, rifle across his back. The widow stepped beside him, her child in her arms. Together, they looked at the horizon, not at the wreck behind them, not at the hunters who might return, but at the future, a future they would face side by side, a human, an alien widow, and her child, bound not by fate, not by chance, but by choice, by love, by family,